I became a fan of the Miraculous series when I was at that tender tween age of 11. And when I watched it, only season 1 was out, and it was at the time that everyone was discussing which character was going to get which Kwami, and there was a bunch of theories that came with it, and honestly, you really just had to be there at the time. And it was around that same time I watched that dreaded anime PV. Like, sometimes I feel like it exists just to taunt us to what we could have received. But anyway, that's here nor there. Because I was 11 years old, I did believe it when it said coming soon at the end of the PV. And when I tell you I was excited, and I was so gripped by the idea of it. And at the time, I was a really big anime fan, and particularly a really big shoujo fan. Not that anything's really changed since. And the PV was created in collaboration with a really big shoujo animation company, Toei Animations, a company responsible for a lot of the shoujo anime I grew up watching. So it just had that slight shoujo touch that I craved. And unfortunately for me, it wasn't until like a year later when I read the comment section that I realized, oh, this anime is in fact never coming soon. But that didn't stop my mind from still creating fantasies of what we could have gotten. But at the time, I was just still happy we were getting like a season 2 to the 3D animated series. And, just to be clear, I actually did really like the 3D animated series, as it was what got me into the fanbase in the first place. And yes, I really did love the PV's animation style, but what I really loved was Felix. And one of the things I used to search up quite often was like Marilix or Philinette fanart. I can't remember which one their ship name was. But I also really did love Adrian in the 3D series, and I really loved his blonde moments. I think those were honestly some of the best comedic moments of the 3D series. But aside from that, technically this video was really long in the making, as I started brewing this like reimagining when I was 14, and when I was 14, the series was still coming out, and I think we were on around season 3 at the time, which is actually where I stopped watching the show. But I did keep updated with the series through the fandom. And at that time, I used to like brew this fanfiction before I went to bed at night. And so fast forward to now, I have redesigned the characters, which is still a little bit new to me. And so I kind of wanted to practice with characters that I already had strong ideas about, so I was like, yeah, Miraculous is a great place to start. And even though I used to brew fanfiction before I went to sleep at night, this reimagining still required a lot of new brainstorming and thinking because the storyline for my younger self wasn't exactly cohesive. And, as a necessary disclaimer, I do not think my ideas are better than the current Miraculous series, and nor was this created to mock the original series, or anyone on the team. I consider this to be like an alternate universe to the current series. Also, I am no professional, I'm only drawing for fun and to improve. This is also a video that would make younger me very happy. And finally, before I get onto the character designs, I've done Kwami redesigns while I explain the lore, as I've changed some aspects of the Miraculous universe for this reimagining. And so with that out of the way, we can now move on to the first segment, which I have labelled Lore. So, to begin, I would have it that the Kwamis guard the Miracle Crystal. This crystal helps the Kwamis keep balance in the world, and it's like a major energy source for the Kwamis. However, the crystal is shattered when someone breaks it. This was done a long time ago so that it couldn't be used in the wrong hands, or for selfish reasons. When the shards shattered, they dispersed, and this caused distress in the Kwamis, so they went looking for the shards. But when they didn't find them, they lost energy and became tired and fell into a deep slumber. And when Kwamis sleep, they become disguised as regular objects. In my universe, the Kwamis would also represent universal concepts, like creation, destruction, defense, offense, time, space, movement, calculation, vigor, and vision, plus 2 more which I'll explain in a bit. However, even though the shards were separated, they were still functional, therefore the world could still continue on regularly, thus keeping the harmony. But the shattering of the shards caused a slight jolt in the universe, leading to the beginnings of a formation of a new Kwami. The story begins when Gabriel gets his hands on one of the shards. That evokes a meeting between him and the new Kwami of Chaos, the Peacock Miraculous, Dusu. Dusu makes an agreement with Gabriel that if he collects all the shards, Dusu will help him grant his wish. Dusu also helps Gabriel to get a hold of the Moth Miraculous. Usually Kwamis are meant to choose their partners, however since the Moth Miraculous didn't choose Gabriel, he synthesized a bond using the crystal shard's power. I like the dynamic of Gabriel being influenced by this like Kwami mastermind, and I think it will add layers to the storyline. I also kept Gabriel's motives pretty similar to the original. However, in this one he uses the Moth Miraculous to find the other shards, as it said that the Miracle Crystal is capable of, crazy enough, creating a miracle. However, Gabriel's selfish reason for using the crystal creates an imbalance in energy, and this causes the shards to be confused and disrupt the harmony. This creates a ripple where an unwarranted surge of energy is placed somewhere. For example, if someone had a really bad day, the negative energy surrounding them would become sentient and start wreaking havoc. The imbalance coming from the shards could be positive or negative energy, as if positive energy becomes sentient, too much of a good thing can become bad. This imbalance in the harmony wakes Tiki and Flag, the first response Kwamis, and they go in search to find someone to partner with. I personally wanted to change the idea that Hawkmoth is at his window every episode sending Akumas out to people, but I wanted to keep the Monster of the Week format going on. I feel like when Hawkmoth is the constant villain in every episode, it kind of loses the idea that he's a big threat. However, in some episodes, we see him use his Akuma, but it's only in search of the shards instead of using it to find Ladybug and Cat Noir's Miraculouses. And Ladybug and Cat Noir also try to find the shards to avoid them being in the wrong hands, but the shards only activate sometimes where they can be locatable. The shards are also disguised so they aren't easy to find. From the first season through to like the second season, I would say a lot of the episodes would involve Ladybug and Cat Noir arriving on the scene to dispel unwarranted energy surges. This will help keep the balance until they find all the shards. I feel like this change adds pressure to Ladybug and Cat Noir to find the shards before Hawkmoth does. I also feel like this adds a bit more of a serious undertone to the show. Now, by this point, you've probably noticed that I've cut down the amount of Kwamis, as I personally felt like there was 7 too many. Well, I just thought there was too many, not exactly 7, but I just cut it down to that number. And I feel like when you give away too many Kwamis to too many characters, I feel like it kind of wears down the charm of having a Miraculous in the first place, which I know a lot of people share this opinion, so it's not like an original idea. However, I do see the appeal of having a lot of Kwamis because it's fun to see the different character designs, but I think there's just a little too many. And in this alternate universe, I would have it that the Kwamis choose the person that they want to partner with, which would ultimately render Wang Fu irrelevant. However, I would still add him to the story in another way, like maybe he comes from a lineage that once helped guard the crystal. So he would have a lot of valuable knowledge on how the shards broke in the first place, the story behind it, and how they can find the shards a lot quicker. Also, just to add on from earlier, I wouldn't have it that just people ooze energy that can become sentient. I would also make it that it can affect inanimate objects and places, or even like a house or a gymnasium as a result of the imbalance. I feel like this would change up the formula of the show, so they're not always fighting physical monsters, but sometimes they're just dispelling energy from places or objects. I feel like this would add fun mystery moments, and I think it would be a fun way to learn more about the characters. Like maybe Cat Noir is scared of haunted houses, and so it'd be fun to see how he deals with that fear without trying to look like a scaredy cat. Pun intended. Also, just as a side note, I wouldn't have it that all the people that have Kwamis / the Kwami holders would be useful in every battle against a monster or against Hawkmoth. I would have it that their Kwami charm, their necklace or their bracelet would vibrate or jitter around when they were needed. This would help keep their identities a secret, and you're still able to have all the fun different Miraculous holder designs. Also, you can have the fun different interactions between the Miraculous holders whilst keeping them all special. Now, back to the Kwamis. The 12 Kwamis I kept are Plag, Tiki, Trix, Waze, Pollen, Sass, Zupu, Raw, Nuru, Dusu, Kalki, and Fluff. I picked these characters because I thought they were the most memorable and distinct enough from each other to have completely different designs when they are in their transformed state. I did initially debate whether I should keep Stomp or Kalki, but I like the idea that if and when Lila eventually gets her hands on one of the Kwamis, it would be Kalki, a timid Kwami. And in Miraculous form, she could be called Dark Horse because she'd still be like a villain in this world. But that's also here nor there. I had to add Zupu because I think he's super cute. And this does mean slightly altering who gets which Miraculous. That doesn't affect the characters I redesigned in this video. I also changed up some of the Kwami appearances, but that's not because I don't like the original, I literally just did it for fun. I actually quite like the original Kwami designs. Like, for example, I gave Plag green inside his ears and a green mark on his nose to make him a little bit more colourful. I also gave Waze what looks like a green helmet on his head, and I gave Sass a few more patterns to make it look like he's mimicking a snake. I also altered Dusu the Peacock Kwami, making them seem a bit more like royalty. In fact, my idea is that Dusu and Fluff were created within the series, and that for the longest time, there was only 10 Kwamis. However, the new strong emotions or concepts like disharmony that spark within the show create Dusu, and then Fluff is created to counter Dusu like Tiki does to Plag, like with creation and destruction. But anyway, this brings us to the end of the Miraculous Kwami redesigns. Finally, sorry for the info dump, but it had to be done. Now we can move on to our characters like Marinette. Here is the mood board I made for Marinette. Feel free to pause it and look at all the different ideas I got. I also got some of these ideas after I drew her anyway, which was a bit silly of me, but I did want to just fill out the mood board, and it's filled with some ideas of clothes that she could wear when she's out of school, or outfits she could wear at different events, and across different seasons, like winter or something. I mainly just tried to capture what I think her vibe is. Before I begin talking about Marinette and her reimagining / redesign, I also need to give some context about the things I've changed about the college / school they go to. In this alternate universe, all the characters I've drawn in this redesign go to this very prestigious school. Usually, going to the school would require you having to pay, however, they do offer 10 scholarships each year and also bursaries for very talented students. The reason I made this alteration is because I feel like this is the only way it makes sense for all the characters to interact. Like, even though Chloe isn't in this redesign, she is the mayor's daughter, and I feel like she would end up going to a very prestigious school, so I was like, how can I get all these characters to merge in a way that makes sense? The school starts from age 14 and ends at age 18. And that would be the total runtime of the show. I'm thinking it would take place over 4 years. However, if it was 15 to 18, that would work too. I don't know, I just made this up. Parts of my other made-up rule include that from ages 14 through to 16, you would do the core subjects like French because they live in France, maths, science, and PE / physical education, and you'd also pick 3 extended courses, something like art, music, or history, etc. You are also required to join a club. And then from ages 16 through to 18, you choose 4 subjects, and those are the subjects you do until you graduate. So usually you'd pick something you're really passionate about in those 4 subjects and something you want to continue on to do at university. Basically, you'd pick 4 subjects which you might want to specialize in later in life. I hope that all makes sense. I mean, this is just a silly idea I had because I was like, oh, how about the school? I just feel like in the Miraculous universe, we don't explore much about the school, so I just decided to add some details. Feel free to agree or disagree with them. I also need to preface. So I have to preface, I was a bit silly in the drawing process of this, and I did the initial development on a different canvas, and I actually did the sketch in my notebook. So that's the reason she kind of pops in half rendered, which this is completely my bad. However, you will get to see how we got to this point later in the video. My brain clearly was not in the same room as me when I was doing this design. In fact, that goes for all the designs because I believe I made the same mistake with all of them. Also, when it comes to my art, I truly believe it's a trust the process kind of thing, so I'm going to hold your hand when I say this. Please trust the process. And now finally, we can finally talk about Marinette, the classic just normal girl with a normal life. And for the most part, I kept it pretty similar to the current Marinette in the Miraculous Universe, minus the breaking and entering into Adrian's house and the over-the-top stalking, of course. And in my AU, she's still the daughter of a baker's family, and she got inspired into fashion by her grandma from when her and her family used to live in China. And it all sparked when Marinette accompanied her grandma to an oldies garment making club, and Mari has been obsessed with fabrics and fashion ever since. Her grandma also knits her clothes every year, and Mari has lots of fun modernizing them and styling them, all with her grandma's blessing, of course, and her grandma even supports it and loves seeing the results as it's a way for them to connect. Marinette is extremely talented at textiles, as we call it in the UK, I don't know what it's called elsewhere, and has won many school competitions. Therefore, she was able to get into the very prestigious college, and she got in on a really good bursary scheme, and she chose the following extended subjects. Fashion design, obviously, food tech/food technology, which is what we call it in the UK, I'm not sure what it's called elsewhere, and history. Marinette is a good student and an overall nice person. However, I would say one of her flaws at the start of the series is the fact that she has amazing ideas and is super creative, but she lacks the confidence in herself. And so whenever she has to share things about herself, she gets really anxious and it gets really awkward for her. However, she doesn't feel this way around Alia, but more on that later. I want to keep some qualities about Marinette, so yes, she is still a bit delusional, and so she does like to romanticize moments and events, but then again, she is in her mid-teens, so it is to be expected at that age. So at times, she does get wrapped into the fantasy. Marinette's creativity is what initially attracts Tiki, as well as her overall naturally good disposition. However, in this version, Tiki does take notice of Marinette's lack of confidence, and it's part of the reason why Tiki is intrigued by Marinette. This is because Tiki is a confident Kwami, and so those two opposing factors attract. It's like where Marinette lacks, Tiki makes up for it. I also just really love contrasts, so seeing shy Marinette turn into bold Ladybug I think makes for a really fun dynamic. After Marinette and Tiki get acquainted, Tiki bonds to Marinette's earrings as they have a lot of energy stored in them, as they were a gift given by Marinette's beloved grandma, so it's a way for Tiki to understand and know Marinette a bit better. This will be important later on in the series, where I would introduce the concept of Kwamix, where Tiki can use her power to create a copy of Marinette when she is in Ladybug form saving the day, but Marinette needs to also be at an event or something. So a mimic of Marinette will be created so that people don't notice her missing. I feel like I came up with this idea because I feel like we needed a plot device, or a reason why, at points Marinette's missing and no one questions it. Energy is really important for Kwamis, and so I feel like Tiki getting this energy from Marinette keeps Tiki from going into a deep slumber. Or not, that's just an idea I had. One of the things that I and many other people didn't like about the show is that Marinette gets away with far too much, and there are no consequences for it. I also didn't particularly like how she was centered in every episode. Like, even when an episode was clearly about another character, she would still get to shine in that episode. Side note, I'd also want to give Chat Noir a lot more responsibilities. These are things I'd want to address and amend in this AU, however, that's a lot easier said than done, and to be honest, I'm acting like I'm going to make a fanfiction. I'm not, but I just wanted to talk about that. Also, another side note, I did feel like sometimes the characters' personalities were a bit shallow, so I'd want to deepen them by giving them more interesting characteristics, which, once again, is a lot easier said than done, and the show has a lot of good things going for it as well. I mean, the show is really funny. And it did a really good job at establishing a lot of the characters. And if you're wondering about Marinette and Felix's relationship, I'll get more into that later. But anyway, Mari is now complete. Before I begin talking, I changed her hair from low pigtails to low messy buns, and I gave her hair clips. I also wanted to give her puffed sleeves and embroidered jeans, as those are some alterations she had made to her own outfit, which I feel adds some personality, and it shows that she's really dedicated to fashion, so much so that she altered her own uniform. Which, this just made me realise I forgot to mention that this school does have a uniform. Not a strict uniform, but a uniform nonetheless. I feel like it adds to that prestigious vibe. The uniform consists of like a purple jumper or blouse or cardigan or anything like that, and it has the school like yellow emblem on the side. You're allowed to wear anything else, like any bottoms you like, but you need to wear the school emblem on your person. And it also has a black tie. I don't know why I chose these colours, I just thought that purple and yellow kind of gave this like slight royalty vibe to it, or made it look a bit more elegant, so that's what I was going for. I would say I like my redesign, however I do think it could have a bit more flair. However, I'll just make this a part of my intended storyline and say that later on in the series, when she gets more confident, she decides to be a bit more bold with her everyday outfits and her school uniform, which will show growth in her character, and so then, we can add a bit more flair to her design. I would also say that she made her own pink bag as a school project, which is great because now she just uses it all the time. And now we can move on to our next character, Alia. Here is the mood board I made for Alia. You can once again pause it and look through it. This is the kind of vibe I get from Alia in terms of like patterns and colour schemes. And I've also intermingled some pictures that just remind me of Alia and Marinette, and a picture that reminds me of the crew altogether, the 4 people I redesigned in this video. One of my personal favourites is the one with the overalls and like the red jacket over it. I think that gives Alia cool, and I feel like if she wore an outfit outside of school, that could be an outfit she wears. I mean, I like all of them, and I can see her wearing all of these, and I think some of these are cooler than what I came up with, but whatever, let's move on to the redesign. In this mental AU I've created, Alia is super academically gifted. The 3 extended subjects she chooses is social science, engineering, I don't know if you can do engineering that young, but she's really smart so maybe she does, and computer science. But if you have any other ideas, feel free to leave them down below. And her core science that she does as a part of the school is actually like super science, like she does like the advanced science. However, despite her mental aptitude, she's somehow still a little bit dumb. And by dumb, I mean she lacks common sense. And she's super gullible. And indecisive. Like, she will just believe anything someone tells her. Even if it's not scientifically possible, I think she just likes to believe the world is a little bit magical, which technically she's not wrong, but you know. I think a fun dynamic between her and Marinette could be created, where often Marinette will just burst her unrealistic bubble. And I think it just gives Alia a bit more character. I don't know, I made this up once again. I've not talked back and forth with anyone on these ideas, so these are just things I came up with. Like, Alia's dumb in the way that she thinks, yeah, maybe someone did see a pig fly, but Marinette is dumb in the way that she, like, you know, she'll romanticize the situation, which probably wasn't exactly the case. She'll just, like, romanticize the events. So they're both a little bit silly, but they're both silly in their own way. I think Alia still has, like, 4 sisters, which she'd be, like, the second youngest. Or maybe she'd have twin sisters, which are younger than her. I'm not sure. I didn't think that much about it, but she'll have 4 sisters is the main point. And the family are really proud of her as she was able to enter the esteemed/prestigious college on a full scholarship, which is only given out to 10 students per year. However, this does mean she still feels quite a lot of pressure to always excel. Aside from that, one of her favourite hobbies is creative writing. Because I want to keep the idea that she used to have that blog kind of alive, so I thought creative writing is a way to kind of have that ode to, like, the original Alia from the Miraculous series. Also, in my AU, Alia and Marinette have been friends since they were 8 years old. This is because when Marinette was still getting used to her life in France after returning from China, Alia was there and she was really non-judgmental and really welcoming to Marinette, which was really nice, since a lot of people were a bit intolerant of Marinette's cultural ignorance. And from there, they ended up really bonding and becoming best friends. I like to think that they often wear matching items to kind of show off their friendship, which I think is really cute. And they're also really compatible, I think, because Alia would tutor Marinette in the fundamental subjects like maths and science, since that's not Marinette's strong suit, and Marinette would return that favour by curating Alia's wardrobe. Because unfortunately for Alia, she tends to have not as much fashion sense as Marinette, let's just say. Her fashion sense is a little bit poor. Like, she might have an idea in her head of what an outfit would look like, but when she tries to do it in real life, it just doesn't translate well in real life. But Marinette couldn't be any happier to sort out Alia's wardrobe. I mean, it also works out really good for Marinette, as Alia is, like, very model-like in my head, or in my AU, sorry. So she's, like, quite tall. So using Alia's measurements to make garments for her projects is a lot easier than using herself sometimes. So Marinette couldn't be happier. And Alia's elated because she can take the clothes home afterwards. So all is well that ends well. Also, side note, I said that it's easier for Marinette to make clothes for Alia, but I'm actually not sure if it's easier to make clothes for other people than it is for yourself. I just assumed it is, but feel free to let me know. For this AU, I feel like Alia is introduced to Trix when Trix chooses to drop the disguise out of disgust for Alia's either gullible or indecisive tendencies, since Trix is more of like a sly, deceptive Kwame. Like, I truly believe Trix was just shocked by Alia's lack of common sense. And I think it will have like a fun contrast between them once again, as Alia is quite light-hearted and a thoughtful person, however Trix is quite intense and quite independent, so I feel like they would balance each other out quite nicely, and I don't know, I feel like it'll great for funny moments between them. I also feel like in the TV show, Alia is a bit underutilized, but in this AU, I'd want her to have a bit more of a prominent role, with her own individual personality, without her personality being the relegated best friend and her whole life revolving around Marinette. And I think it'd be good to have episodes dedicated to Alia. And of course, she'd be the first person to suspect Marinette of being Ladybug. They are besties after all. You would notice something. All that said, Alia is now complete. She was a bit of a struggle to draw. I think I struggled the hardest with her for some reason, and I do feel like her design could have been a bit better overall, but she has the vibe I'm going for, and I personally really like the close-up face I gave her. I think it suits the AU version I have of her in my head. I changed her hairstyle to like a low ponytail, but I personally see her changing her hairstyles quite often throughout the show, or the AU, sorry. She's a tall girl, she's taller than Marinette, and at times being as tall as she is, it can make her feel a little bit odd, but it does come in handy, especially when Mara needs to see something or get a better view. Also, drawing this made me realize I cannot draw long skirts, and the skirt did not come out the way I imagined it to, but you know, I had to move on. And it also gives me homework to learn how to draw long skirts. The skirt was also meant to be plaid in my head, but I don't know why it just didn't work out that way, but I'm fine with it. But overall, I think she's decently quite cute, so I'm happy. This segues us into the short segment, where I divulge a bit more into the characters and explore their friendships and a few events that will take place. Here is where I show you how I got to those like half-rendered sketches that just popped up onto the canvas, so that's what I'll be playing in the background while I talk a bit more about how the storyline works and some of the friendships and stuff. Because I feel like in the show sometimes friendship can take the backseat compared to romance, which I personally feel like is a bit of a shame, as I'd want them to have similar importance. I mean, I feel like sometimes the show is really good at showing friendships, and then other times it just focuses quite a lot on just Adrian and Marinette, but then again, it's been a while since I've watched it, so maybe I just have bad recollection. In this AU, Marinette definitely takes a while before she likes Felix. But the Agreste is a really big name when it comes to fashion, and Marinette is a really big fan of the Agreste fashion company. But when Alia finds out that Felix will be going to their school, an idea brews in her mind. She's like, Marinette, you have to befriend him. Which is much to Marinette's dismay because she's quite socially awkward. Which she tells Alia they have nothing in common, so what would they even talk about? But Alia's like, think about the future. If you befriend him now, Marinette, you could sneak into the company via nepotism. Alia's trying to like drill into Marinette's mind. It's all about the connections and who you know, which she isn't wrong. That is kind of how the world works. I mean, and all Alia wants is for Marinette to secure her spot in the Agreste company, mainly because Alia really believes in Marinette and she knows Marinette's really talented, so she just wants to see the best for her. And to be honest, that's so real because I would do that for one of my friends. Which, even though Marinette doesn't say it out loud, she wouldn't be against it. But, much to their dismay, Alia's plan goes south when they realized Felix is really closed off, and it was like his vibe, his aura, was extremely hard to approach. So they kind of just scrapped it. But that's where Nino comes in, but I'll explain a bit more on that later. An activity that both Alia and Marinette enjoy is reading comics together, and I feel like they'd often talk about the updates, and it'll be a cool way to add in some Easter eggs. When it comes to the iconic umbrella scene, I'm thinking I'd make it happen a little bit later in season 1, well, in this fake AU season 1, and the situation would be that Marinette needs a male model, but she doesn't have that many guy friends, and she's not that used to making garments for guys. But then she asks Nino if he would do it, which Nino's like down for anything, so he's like, sure. And at this point, Nino and Felix would be friends. But suddenly, oh no, Nino couldn't make it anymore due to maybe like a family event or a football match that he's a part of. So he asked Felix to sub in for him. And this would require them staying after school for a little bit. It would be the first time they ever had like a proper conversation one-on-one. And so she's a little bit nervous, but this is also where Felix gets to see her potential when it comes to fashion. So anyway, after they finish up, it starts to rain, and on the way out, Felix offers Marinette his umbrella because he's going to be driven home anyway, and Marinette was going to take some form of transport. But mainly, I feel like this is the point of like where the feelings start brewing. And then after that, Alia was like, oh my gosh, it's possible, you can join the aggressed company. But it just becomes an inside joke between them. Also, I forgot to say that Marinette and Alia would be in the same club. I think they would both be in like a creative outlet club or creative something club. Now we can move on to the next character, Felix. Here is Felix's mood board. This is just a bunch of pictures that I think give Felix vibes, so you can pause it and look at them if you're interested in what I think Felix's vibe is. There is also one picture on here which I think gives what Nino and Felix would look like if they were standing next to each other. But anyway, moving on. Felix is actually the only character I've restarted because I really do not know what I was thinking the first time around when I drew him, which you can kind of see it faintly in the background, and I still use parts of the old design in the new one, but anyway, onto the details. I kept his story pretty similar to the Adrian from the original Miraculous series and also the concept art of Felix. In this AU, his mom died 2 years prior to the start of the series, and I honestly feel bad for the poor guy because ever since, his dad has been super distant and really negligent, so he feels like he's had to mourn the death of his mum and kind of his dad. And for the past 2 years, he's been super busy. He's been pushed into different clubs, from music to fencing to modelling and whatever else. So he doesn't have that much time for himself, and therefore he hasn't properly been able to process everything that happened. But if he does have one thing, it's that in my AU, he's a bit of a nerd. I'm thinking like gamer, but it could also be anything else. But he actually hides his interest, as when he brought it up to his dad one day, he got dismissed, and his dad redirected the question to be about like his piano lessons. And when he wanted to talk about it to Chloe, she was super uninterested. So he ended up just keeping it to himself. But he does have merch and stuff in a dedicated hidden part of his room. And through his gaming, he actually made an online friend, which they talk all the time, and they've been friends for over a year now. However, they've never met in person, and the game censors personal information. But we'll get a little bit more on that later. One day, Felix was on his balcony, and he was ruminating about how packed his schedule is, and how his life is so ordered, and yet he feels so unfulfilled, and sometimes he just craves to be a little bit mischievous. This is where Plag takes notice of Felix, because Plag loves his freedom, and Plag is an uninhibited, free-spirited, teasing Kwame, which is a complete contrast to the way that Felix portrays himself. And I feel like Plag kind of pities Felix, and that's kind of how they got intertwined. Felix is a naturally very kind person, but he hides it under his apathetic persona. I also feel like the reason why Felix gets obsessed with Ladybug is because he has a slightly defunct attachment style. And yes, he likes Ladybug, however, I feel like he gets infatuated with her because of how unattainable she is, so he can obsess over her all he wants, without there being much at stake. However, this is something he realizes within the storyline, and that's why even when he likes Marinette, he hesitates, because he's a bit scared that if he goes all in, it might come crashing down, in a way similar to the way his family did. Ouch. Which I feel like this is really sad, but it kind of makes sense for his storyline, and it makes sense to why he's dense to Mari's advances. Changing the subject, I also really like the idea that since Felix is really rich, it means that he has no clue on the way that things work for most people. So I feel like it'd be fun to see him get really excited over something so seemingly normal, or be confused on how normal things work. Or even as simple as eating street food for the first time. They would all be like a first time for him, and I feel like he'd be like, whoa, this is crazy stuff. And I feel like initially he wasn't really bothered where he went to school, but he ended up going to this college because of Chloe. And so from Chloe's dad's influence, Gabriel just sent Felix to this esteemed college, which I just call it the prestigious college because there is a name for it in the canon Miraculous universe, but it's in French and I don't want to mispronounce it, so I'm gonna just keep calling it this esteemed prestigious college. So now him and Chloe go to the same school. The 3 extended subjects Felix chooses is foreign languages, business, and it was meant to be music, but since he applied a little bit late, music got filled up, and so he had to do food tech instead. This is a class he shares with Marinette, and it's the only class he's super bad at. This is usually because all of his meals have always been pre-made by like their family chef, and so he's really terrible at it, but Marinette's obviously really good because she comes from a baker's family. I feel like this will end up to a lot of cute moments where Marinette often has to assist Felix, but also Felix is a little bit prideful, so he doesn't want to like be bad at anything, so he often doesn't want to ask for help. I don't know, I just think this would be a fun way to get them to interact and to get to know the characters a bit more. But because he couldn't do music as one of his extended subjects, he goes to a music club instead. But anyway, that leads us to the end of Felix. I hope that made sense, and I hope that you guys like that idea, but I'm really open to new ideas, so feel free to also tell me any other ideas you have. I know I've said that quite a few times, but, you know, I would really like to know what everyone else thinks. In this came out a lot more model looking than what I was initially going for, but I guess it kind of suits him. Another thing is he's got 2 different hairstyles going on. He's got one on the full body shot and then one on the full face shot. I actually don't know which one I prefer. One looks a bit more like the concept art, and then the full body one has a bit more of an Adrian touch and a model touch to it. So I'm not really sure which one I like better. So the only way I think to fix this is to say that maybe throughout the season his hair changes. I did try to go for a tailored look that fits in with his modeling background. I gave him an exposed belt and a satchel bag, and I also did another look where he has glasses. I think that Felix often wears contacts because maybe the photographer was like, the glasses look is just not what the company's going for at the moment. And so over time he just wears contact lenses. However, when he's off duty, he often wears his glasses. Like when he wants to go out and about and he doesn't want to get recognized. So he'll wear like baggier clothes, his hair will be a bit messier. And that's like him in like disguise mode, I suppose. And that's how he goes into like the game shops to get like his merch and stuff. I also feel like throughout the series, he kind of starts off as Felix and then towards the end, he ends up a bit more like Adrian as his walls come down. That's just where I wanted to end it, because I feel like I both like Adrian and Felix in their own way. But I mean, I am biased to Felix, but I do like both of them. Anyway, we can now move on to our last character of the video, Nino. Here we have Nino's mood board. Once again, it's just a bunch of pictures that I think give off the character's vibe. And once again, feel free to pause it if you'd like to look at them for longer. But in this mood board, I added a few more pictures of what I think the crew would look like together, or even what him and Alia look like together. And I think there's one on here that's just Marinette and Felix. Like, it's just a bunch of pictures that I think you could draw over them, and it would give the same vibes as the characters. Okay, so on to Nino. Nino is the character I think I have kind of like the easiest time with. In my EU, Nino is extremely social. He happens to know everyone somehow. I think this would be like a funny gag in the story. Like when the characters need to get into somewhere like a party, but they don't have the connections. And then Nino just gets up, goes away for a moment, then comes back with an invite. He's like, oh yeah, so I just talked to so-and-so over there, and we'll be expected at 10. I feel like this makes all the other characters quite impressed because they're not as extroverted as Nino is. I also feel like this would be a really convenient plot point at times, but I feel like it wouldn't be annoying because we've already established it at the beginning of the storyline. The 3 extended subjects Nino shows are geography, social science, and business. And he's also in football club, or soccer if you happen to be American. I feel like Nino also got into the school on a really good bursary scheme, and he shares all his cool classes with Felix. Felix, the guy that's super closed off. But Felix being closed off sets Nino a challenge, because Nino is that person that's friends with everyone. So how difficult could it be to be friends with Felix? Very hard, apparently. It was very hard for Nino, because Felix did not give him anything to work with. Like, if Nino asked anything, I feel like Felix would answer in one-word replies, or he would just and be really indifferent. But for a very long time, Nino did not give up. But when he was about to give up, Nino, in passing, mentioned a game he's really into. Which, can you guess where this is going? It's the game that Felix also likes. And this is how they find out they've been online buddies for over a year. And this really changes up Felix's attitude. And Felix starts to open a lot more up to Nino. At first, Felix was really skeptical of Nino because he felt like Nino was just kind of weird. I know this trope is quite cliche, but I think it's cute. Going back to Nino, I feel like Nino has had the fattest crush on Alia for a while now. And usually Nino is super confident with everybody, but the only person that makes him nervous is Alia. And I'm personally really bummed that we didn't get more episodes surrounding them and their love story. So in this fake AU, I would change that. I would have more episodes dedicated around their relationship because I think they're so cute. And I'm thinking that they would be in the tension stages around season 1 and they'd only get together around the start of season 2. I feel like this would be a fun way to have the story progress and have a little bit of a slow burn as well with them while we're waiting for Felix and Marinette to get their stuff together. However, what is a happy-go-lucky character without some angst? And unfortunately for Nino, I'm thinking that we have to kill off his older brother. In this AU, I'm thinking he had a really loving older brother who passed away. I think he'll still have a younger sibling, but his older sibling that passed away meant a lot to him. And I'm thinking that perhaps the hat he wears all the time is actually from his brother, or the hats he wears is from his brother's old collection. And so he's often quite protective of it. But on the bright side, I'm thinking that in an episode where it's either really cold weather or really hot weather, Nino would give his hat to Alia for her to wear, and it's like a sign of affection and trust. And I think it would be a really sweet moment. However, I feel like Nino does throw himself into a lot of social situations to avoid thinking about a lot of things introspectively. I also feel like Nino has really good instincts, but sometimes he doesn't always listen to them. But this is where the turtle miraculous Waze is attracted to Nino. As Waze is one of the more introspective Kwamis, and Waze is also quite introverted, so I think it'd be a fun contrast between introverted Waze and extroverted Nino. Once again, I'm back at it with my contrasts. Waze is also quite mature, but also really insightful, so I feel like they would have a lot of fun moments together, and I feel like they'd be a good pair. Why Nino got a crush on Alia, I'm not completely sure, but I'm thinking it's stemming from an event in their past, like maybe it was at some kind of academic competition, and maybe something Alia said or did really stuck with Nino. I also feel like Nino is one of those characters that would just be a fan favourite. I don't know, I just feel like he's so cute. But enough of that, he is now complete. I feel like I gave him a lot of things that really emulate turtle vibes. And to be honest, I did struggle a little bit with the colour scheme, like the purple and the green. But for some reason I don't hate the end result. It is a bit weird, but I think it's okay, I think it works. I also redesigned the Kwamis after I redrew the characters, so his colour scheme is a little bit off if you compare it to Waze. But oh well. I also gave him brown bottoms and a cap, but I feel like he would alter which hat he uses throughout the episodes and seasons. And his brother left him behind a really good collection of hats. And also I feel like Nino just enjoys collecting different kinds of hats. I made his uniform a bit more disheveled compared to the other characters, which I feel like makes sense for Nino, as he's quite carefree and doesn't feel the need to be as put together as Felix does. I'm overall pretty happy with his design, but I do feel like it could have been a bit better in places. But anyway, we can now move on to another short segment, going a bit further into the relationships between the characters and the storyline. In the background, you can see the origin sketches of Nino and Felix, but also you might see a little bit of Chloe and Luca pop in for Nino's canvas, but that's because I drew them all on the same canvas. So spoilers, I drew some more characters. But moving on, when it comes to the friendship between Felix and Nino, I see their relationship really blossoming and becoming something quite sweet. Like, I think Nino really pushes Felix out of his comfort zone and makes him try new things. And when it comes to the classes that they share together, I feel like if Nino, for example, is late to lesson or he's sleeping during class, I feel like Felix, against his better judgment, would distract the teacher, bringing unwanted attention towards himself, while he either waits for Nino to get to class or he waits for him to wake up during the lesson. Which Nino would obviously do this for Felix any day, but I don't think he usually needs to because Felix is pretty much always on time. I feel like deep down, Felix secretly likes breaking the rules because he's been so rule-bound his whole life, so he enjoys to break free a little bit. I also feel like Nino genuinely listens to Felix and remembers things about him, like his birthday, where I think that he would buy Felix something meaningful, which would leave Felix really stunned and grateful, because Felix is not used to receiving things that are related to his interests. This kind of act of kindness really sticks with Felix because he didn't have much in mind for Nino's birthday, but he does plan to make up for it in the next year. As the series continues, Felix does start to come more of a shell and make a lot more friends. However, Nino is still his best friend. And when or if Nino ever needs his help with anything, Felix would gladly ditch one of his extracurricular activities to go and help Nino instead. I also feel like Felix tries to support Nino when Nino wants to confess his feelings to Alia. However, Felix just doesn't really know what to say, so oftentimes he just nods along to whatever Nino says. I also feel like it'd be really cute that at some point when someone else tries to refer to Nino as their best friend, Felix gets really jealous. He's genuinely offended that someone else would consider Nino their best friend, knowing that Felix is Nino's best friend. Somewhere later down the line anyway. I don't know. And now we have come to the end of this segment, and we'll move on to our brief final segment, which I have labelled the end notes. Here is the end result of all the designs I've made in this video, and as you can see, I really did try to make the characters kind of match their Kwami, especially when it comes to the shape language. Like when it comes to the Fox Miraculous and the Cat Miraculous, I gave Alia and Felix more triangular features, since those Kwamis are a bit sharper. And then when it comes to Marinette, I gave her more circular features, and with Nino, I feel like I made him a bit more rectangular, but there are also some circle elements incorporated into his design. However, I'm now going to change the subject to be a bit more about their friendship as a whole. For example, I feel like when Alia's with Felix, they're both going to be a little bit dense, or maybe Alia's denseness would rub off on Felix. I could see them getting locked up in a room somewhere, but they didn't actually get locked in. I feel like they just didn't read the signs properly, and then Marinette comes in to save the day and help them out by doing the most simple thing, which they didn't notice was there. I think they'd become a really cute friendship group as the series progresses. But, on a side note, I want to talk about Marichat, because I was a really big Marichat fan. And so of course I'd have to find a way to incorporate them into this AU somehow. I also feel like Marichat would be a really good way for Felix to get to know Marinette a bit more when Marinette's got her guard down. And of course, Marinette would feel comfortable with Cat Noir because she knows him when she's in Ladybug form, so she doesn't feel the need to act any different around him. And so Felix would get to see a more candid Marinette, which I feel like he would enjoy. But despite Felix getting a crush on Marinette, Marinette doesn't think her feelings are reciprocated because one day during their lunchtime a while back, Nino and Alia ask Felix if there's anyone he has a crush on. And without thinking properly, he actually says yes, but he was referring to Ladybug. And then Nino and Alia proceed to ask if they know the person he's talking about. And so he says yes, but you wouldn't know her personally. And since Nino and Alia didn't pry further, Nino, Alia, and Marinette all think he's talking about someone in the model industry or a celebrity, which leads Marinette to feel a bit down and lose some hope. And that's where Luca comes in. But that's for another video, and maybe the next video. Since, as you know, I've already created the sketches for Luca, Chloe, and some other characters, tell me if you would want to see a part 2 to this video, and if there are any characters you'd like to see in the next video if I haven't already mentioned them. This video ended up taking me quite a while to make, but I really hope you enjoyed it. And I honestly didn't expect it to come out like a proper rewrite. I didn't realize how many ideas I had until I wrote them down. And if there's anything you think I've missed, or anything you're confused about, or anything you think I can add, please let me know your thoughts down below, and I'll be happy to respond to all of them. And for future videos, I'd really like to do some OC redesigns, some more reimaginings, some art challenges, and quite a few other things, but we'll see it when we get to it. If that's something you might be interested in, then feel free to support this channel, which is something I never thought I'd say. That's such a weird thing to say. And yeah, thank you for making it this far. Feel free to now press the home button.